Thank you very much, Derek. So today I'm very pleased to be your panelist at today's webinar on the chemicals and waste multilateral environmental agreements in the framework of the SDGs. And I'm very happy to see a few familiar names from the list of participants, but also welcome all participants to this webinar. We know that some consider the theme of chemical and waste management is quite a technical issue with a strong focus on environment. And while it is so, I personally find it very fascinating to discover and analyze various linkages between the environmental issues and social economic pillars of the sustainable development in relation to chemical and waste management. And that really shows truly multidisciplinary nature of this issue. I structured my presentation today in 3 parts. I will start with setting the scene and talking about 3 conventions in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Then I will zoom into the 3 conventions in more details from the life cycle management point of view. And lastly, I will finish off by talking about measuring progress at various levels. Well, starting with the first part, well, we all know that 2 years ago, in 2015, world leaders agreed on a shared vision about how the world would look like in 2030 by adopting the Agenda for Sustainable Development. What does it mean for chemicals and waste cluster? Well, it means detoxifying air, water, and soil, promoting the use of safe chemicals and their alternatives, minimizing the use of toxic substances in production and consumption, and preventing or reducing the generation of hazardous and other waste and safely manage them. While there is no specific goal is dedicated to chemicals and waste, these issues rather integrated throughout various other goals. But we are confident to say that chemicals and waste are an essential part for the implementation of various goals on poverty reduction, health, gender, water, cities, oceans, food, and sustainable consumption production. For example, if we take the goal on poverty reduction, there is a clear link that has been established between poverty and increased risk of exposure to hazardous chemicals and waste, because it's predominantly the poor who routinely face unacceptably high risk because of their occupation, living situation, and lack of knowledge about the adverse impact of exposure to toxics. Although it's less pronounced, there are also other important areas where we can link chemical and waste. So, for example, education and climate change. So the 2030 Agenda actually acknowledged the key cross-cutting nature of the chemical and waste management, and particularly because it can provide practical solutions to overcome not only local but also global challenges. And let me just give you a few highlights in terms of where we stand in terms of the challenges related to chemicals waste management. Well, first of all, it's air pollution. And in fact, air pollution is the world's single greatest environmental risk to health. Around 7 million people across the world died prematurely every year from exposure to outdoor and indoor air pollution. In fact, UNICEF reported that approximately 2 billion children live in areas where outdoor air pollution exceeds the WHO guidelines. And this is if we also add to the to air pollution exposure to polluted soil and water, then we could see that the scale of the problem is very large. And in fact, people in low and middle income countries suffer the most from this challenge. And just to put also these numbers into perspective, HIV and AIDS cause approximately 1.5 billion deaths per year, tuberculosis between 1 and 1.2 million, and malaria fewer than 1 million deaths per year. Well, another aspect of the chemicals and waste management is that everybody is exposed to toxics and chemicals. It's humans, it's animals, and I would like to highlight one particular group of chemicals which are particularly toxic, and these chemicals are called persistent organic pollutants, so-called POPs, which are known as powerful pesticides, or they also serve in a range of industrial purposes. And some POPs are also released as unintended byproducts of combustion and industrial processes. So what is common between various POPs? Well, they share similar properties. So first of all, the POPs are highly toxic. Then they are persistent, lasting for years or even decades before degrading into the less dangerous forms. They evaporate and travel long distances through the air and water, and they accumulate in fatty tissue. And this is a dangerous combination, because the persistent mobility of POPs means that they are literally everywhere in the world, even in some remote mountainous areas, in the Arctic, Antarctica, and even remote Pacific islands. And the attraction to fatty tissues, known as a bioaccumulation, means that toxic at first is dispersed widely and thinly, but then gradually it starts to concentrate as one organism is consumed by another, thus moving up to the food chain. And what is also very interesting about the POPs is that the transport of POPs depends on temperature. And there is a process which is called grasshopper effect, where chemicals jump around the globe, evaporating in warm places and riding the wind and particles of the dust, and then settling in cooler places. So there is a tendency for POPs to move towards the pole and mountains areas. And we know that also in the colder places, fish, birds, mammals, they need to have a thicker layer of fat for natural insulation against freezing temperatures. So the chemical contamination builds to high levels in these organisms, and indigenous people in the Arctic, for example, whose traditional diets are heavy in fatty foods and who often don't have any alternatives to nourishment, they have the highest recorded levels of POPs, although they are situated hundreds and thousands of kilometers from the releases of POPs into the nature. Well, we also have another big sector which is related to chemicals as waste management, and if there is no proper measures to control it, regulate it, it can also cause concern, is agricultural area, is agriculture. And the major concern there is with pesticides, because on one hand they facilitate a large increase in food production, but on the other hand they also generate almost universal human exposure to synthetic chemicals. And the evidence of the negative health effects of pesticides are well known. In high-income countries, farmers have higher rates of some form of lymphoma and Parkinson disease attributed to pesticides. And chronic pesticides exposures on men and women actually vary considerably. And there is a strong connection between pesticides and breast cancer rates. Then we have another aspect of global challenges related to chemicals and waste, and there it's something which is relatively recent, although not anymore really recent. It's the issue of e-waste. It's a waste of electrical products, and e-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world. And in 2014, for example, people worldwide discarded almost 42 million metric tons of e-waste through thrown away their microwave ovens, washing machine, dishwashers, mobile phones, computers, and on and so forth. And this is a reality. And it's even what is more concerning is that only 1/6 of these volumes is thought to have been diverted to proper recycling and reuse. But of course, we also have, with challenges, you also have opportunities. And if handled with caution, e-waste can potentially create jobs if safety measures are applied to those who are engaged in this sector. Also, we have a concern with mercury releases from the small-scale gold mining, and this is an issue which is addressed by the the new convention is called Minamata Convention on Mercury, which is going to enter into force in August, very soon. Again, here there is the issue of poverty, which needs to be addressed. So if we look at the sound management of chemicals and waste, we can see it as a Rubik cube. It's a toy which you can we look. It's a complex issue, but you need to put various pieces together in the right combination to have a solution. And you can see how many various issues are really involved here, starting with the technology transfer, sustainable green chemistry, data monitoring, circular economy, alternatives to chemicals, and so on and so forth. And this issue, well, finding the solutions to global problems is really it's becoming more and more urgent, because the global cost of only pollution already amounts to over 15% of gross domestic products. And this is a conservative estimate, given not all pollutant and waste are included in these estimates. So what has the international community been doing about this? Well, in fact, back in 1972, governments already have signaled that it's important to tackle the problem of related to toxic substances. And initially it was related to the air quality in cities, but little by little, with more substances entering the market, the issue became more and more complex. In 92, for example, in Rio, governments agreed to the Agenda 21, which promoted the environmentally sound management of toxic chemicals, including prevention of illegal international traffic. Then later, the number of multilateral environmental agreements were adopted in different times. And then in 2002, the so-called SAICM goal, 2020 goal, was also agreed by the governments. And this goal is that chemicals should be used and produced in a way that lead to the minimization of significant adverse effects on human health and the environment. And more recently, in Rio 2012, government further recognized this goal in the outcome document, The Future We Want. Well, if we look at the chemicals and waste cluster, as we say, we can see there are several layers. The first layer is a policy, and we can even say legislation. And here, yes, we do have a legally binding instrument, such as conventions, Minamata Convention, as I mentioned. We also have ILO Convention, but also you have something which is called soft law, which is non-legally binding, which sometimes with the time becomes a legally binding. Then on the level of the implementation, you have various UN agencies and other intergovernmental organizations and regional organizations are involved in the in supporting countries, and in particular developing countries and countries with economy in transition, in achieving in the implementation of the conventions, but also broader chemical waste management agenda. And on the level of information, there is also a lot of work being done and has been done. For example, UN Environment produced various assessments, Global Chemicals Outlook, Global Waste Management Outlook, the Global Environmental Outlook 6. There is a UNEP Live, which is a very interesting online instrument which can demonstrate various data sets. There are also national reports under the conventions, and a few other elements which I'll be talking about a little bit later. So now, since I represent the Secretariat of the three conventions, the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm, I will specifically say a few words about those three, but this is just to remember that we also have a new convention which will enter into force, Minamata Convention on Mercury. There is also Montreal Protocol, and there is also voluntary approach which is called SICAM. It's a strategic approach to international chemical management, which are also important elements for the framework for life cycle management. So as for the Basel Convention, well, this is one of the older conventions. It's 25 years old. It's a convention on the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. It has a nearly global coverage in terms of the parties, those countries which actually participate and involve in the convention. The scope is hazardous waste, which are generally explosive, flammable, reactive, poisonous, and so on and so forth. So hazardous waste and other waste, which are household waste and the ash from household waste. So you can see that the scope of this convention is really broad. There are only a few exceptions. For example, radioactive waste is not included in the scope of the Basel Convention. And the key provisions of this convention is related to the minimization of generation of hazardous and other waste, then controlling the transboundary movements, and it has various procedures. And well, I should mention that it doesn't necessarily ban the import-export of hazardous waste between countries, but it controls it, just to make sure that the receiving country can ensure that the waste which it will receive, it will be able to ensure environmentally sound management of this waste. So these are the main, let's say, philosophy of this convention. Then we have a Rotterdam Convention, which was developed and adopted later in 2004. And this convention about the prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade. So this convention is really about international trade, about import and export. It covers industrial chemicals, pesticides, and severely hazardous pesticide formulations. And currently it has 50 chemicals on its list to which this prior informed consent procedure is applied, meaning that when two countries that are parties to the Rotterdam Convention want to trade these chemicals, they need to inform each other, and if the receiving country does not wish to receive these chemicals, then a country of export should not or must not proceed with a trade. And the Stockholm Convention is about the specific group of chemicals which I already mentioned about, persistent organic pollutants. And currently there are 28 chemicals are on the list. And this convention includes obligations to parties to either eliminate its production or restrict its production, restrict the use, and also restrict or eliminate unintentionally produced chemicals, POPs, for example, if it's a byproduct. And although these are the three distinctive separate legal instruments, global treaties, they have various common elements. For example, when it comes to the evaluating and regulating new chemicals, Rotterdam and Stockholm, they have this feature in common. When it comes to import-export controls, all three conventions have this as a common feature. Waste management applies to Basel when it comes to the POPs waste or POPs containing waste, and Stockholm, and other common features. And that's why we also, well, our parties wanted to ensure that there is a improved coordination, cooperation between those three conventions, and to also to promote the coherency, policy coherency at the global level, at the national level. And this is why we had a process called synergies process, to really to starting with a global level to ensure that decisions taken by the conference of the parties between those three conventions are coherent and supportive of each other. Of course, now the main challenge with implementation of this convention in a coherent way is at the national level with countries, and then this process is ongoing. And this is to show that indeed we look at the framework. Well, we use the philosophy of the life cycle management for when we present the convention, because it's in a way it's a cradle to grave approach. So we start with if you look at the design of new products, or you need to ensure that there's a less toxic chemicals are used in the products. When we're talking about production or import, there is it can be some limitations which are coming from the Stockholm Convention. Then during the stage of the use of either products or industrial processes you have, there are certain controls provided by the convention, and then when either products or pesticides or they all reach the end of life stage where the Basel Convention applies, and this is where some, let's say, products or they go to the disposal, incineration, some go to the recycling. So in a way, it's a life cycle approach, and of course that was possible to look from this perspective because all three conventions have the common objective to protect human health and environment, and most POPs are covered by the three conventions, and many pesticides are also subject to the three conventions, and of course as waste, all chemicals fall under the scope of the Basel Convention. Now, as legally binding global treaties, the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions are equipped with mechanisms to track, monitor, and evaluate the achievement of their objectives. For Basel Convention, this includes a strategic framework, which has some indicators, and the national reporting. For Rotterdam Convention, that is information exchange on specific chemicals. And for the Stockholm Convention, it's evaluation of the convention effectiveness and global monitoring, national reports, and national implementation plans. Also, there are scientific bodies under the Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention, which also provide scientific risk evaluation and assessment for the new chemicals. Just to give you an idea what kind of, let's say, what kind of mechanisms specifically exist under the conventions and what kind of data is being collected under different conventions. For example, if we take the Basel Convention, then the parties have the obligation to submit a national report every year, and there is a specific format and specific questions, what kind of information they must submit. And so this includes waste control for the purpose of transboundary movement. So countries can provide definition of hazardous waste, which is goes beyond the Basel Convention. So they can have stricter, they can apply the Basel Convention in a stricter way. They can add additional waste streams which they want to consider hazardous. They also need to provide information on the measures on restriction of transboundary movements. For example, they can restrict import, export, transit of specific waste stream, of specific waste type. So this information is to be provided in the national reports. They also need to describe the regulatory measures, effect on human health and environment. They also need to report on the accidents occurring during the import-export of hazardous waste. And they also need to report on the disposal facilities operated within their countries. In addition, there is also very important part of the national reports, which I need to mention, because it's is related to the SDGs and global indicators, and the information which countries are supposed to need to provide is the total amount of waste, hazardous and other waste generated within the countries domestically, as well as the amount of export-import of hazardous waste. Under the Rotterdam Convention, as we talked about, that there is 50 chemicals currently on the list on the Rotterdam Convention, and the obligation that parties have is to decide whether they will allow the import of these chemicals included on the list. They can allow the import, they can allow with conditions, or they can deny. So in principle, parties to the Rotterdam Convention need to provide 50 responses, something what we call import response. There's information about 50 regulatory action about the chemicals which are on the list of the Rotterdam Convention. And this is information which is being gathered by the Rotterdam Convention. Now, under the Stockholm Convention, and here I will draw on the examples from the effective evaluation report, which was completed and approved just recently in 2017. Well, the main question is that the Stockholm Convention had very specific objectives when it was developed, basically in reducing the levels of POPs in human and the environment. And this effectiveness evaluation process helps to understand where we stand in this regard. So in general, for the initially listed POPs in 2014, that was the so-called dirty dozen, the concentration measured in air and human population have declined and continue to decline or remain at low levels due to the restriction on POPs that was required by the Stockholm Convention. For the newly listed POPs, so we have also this additional 16 chemicals which were added. Concentrations are beginning to show decreases, although in few instances some stable levels or even increase is observed. And here I would like I wanted to share with you just some graphs to illustrate various data collected in the framework of the Stockholm Convention. For example, here we have a distribution by sources of releases. Well, we can say dioxin and furans. This is unintentionally produced POPs, and this is the air releases. So we can see from the graph is that the highest contributor to the global air releases is open burning with 50%, followed by waste incineration and metal industry and heat and power generation. And open burning is the highly dominant source of release to air in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America, while heat and power generation is a major contributor to air releases in Central and Eastern Europe and developed countries in Europe, Australia, and other countries. High income countries tend to have lowest average releases of dioxin and furans per capita, whereas lower middle income countries have highest releases. Then we also can say that the Stockholm Convention looks into the biomonitoring and human biomonitoring, and in fact it was recognized that human biomonitoring is essential to evaluate whether human exposure to POPs is indeed decreasing or increasing over time. And concentration of POPs in human milk are considered good indicators of the actual body burden. In addition, human milk is considered as one of the best sampling metrics for biomonitoring due to its availability and non-invasive approach when collecting samples. Well, over the last decades, human milk has generally been used as a medium to measure contamination in humans, and analytical techniques have been well established for most POPs which are included in the Stockholm Convention. And we can see that compared to the previous decade, we have a significant decreases of, for example, dioxin and furans in human milk as well as PCBs. Here we have another graph with the concentration of chemical, which is called PBDEs in human milk. So this is industrial chemical, which is used in the production of various products, quite often plastics. It's a flame retardant. And here we could see the high concentrations have been measured in pooled samples from industrialized countries such as the US and Australia, but also in the Pacific Islands and in the GRULAC, Latin America and Caribbean region, for example, Antigua and Barbuda, Haiti, Jamaica, and Mexico. So we can see that indeed the POPs are traveling around the world, not necessarily are being produced in these countries. Here I also wanted to show you a graph about the production of DDT. As you know, back in the 70s or even earlier, DDT was used as a pesticide, and then many countries stopped producing and using it. But we could see that, well, although the global production of DDT declined, we still know that India is the only known remaining producer of DDT. Also, the global use of DDT declined. And again, India has been responsible for almost 96% of the global use, and it uses DDT for control of malaria. So the use of DDT for malaria control in sub-Saharan Africa has been relatively minor as compared to the use in India, and especially in recent years, the use in Africa is estimated to be less than 100 tons per year. So it's quite a small fraction of the global use. And here we have another graph about concentration of acidity in human milk. And again, we have highest levels found in tropical and subtropical countries. So this data suggests that there is a legacy contamination through the past exposure. So you can see that we collect various set of data, and there are various requirements for countries to submit, to provide data under these 3 different conventions. And you might say, so, okay, so what is the relevance to the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? Well, in fact, there is a relevance, and there is, in some cases, very direct relevance. So we know that last year, in March 2016, there was a list of indicators adopted, and currently, if I'm not mistaken, there are 232 indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals, and in general, there is a tiered approach used in terms of the indicators. So there is a so-called tier 1 indicators, which are conceptually clear, and there is established methodology and standards, and there is a data which is regularly produced by countries to report on this indicator. Then there is a so-called tier 2 indicators, which again are conceptually clear, and there is a methodology and standards, but data are not regularly produced by countries. And then there is a tier 3 indicators, for which there is no established methodology or standards. And also, it's important to know that there is a so-called custodian agencies are responsible for different indicators and for reporting this data analysis, or if it's a tier 3 indicators, for the development of the methodology. And the data is then reported to the United Nations High-Level Political Forum by the custodian agency. And this data is categorized by country and per year. So the most direct relevance to us, to the Secretariat of the 3 conventions, is this indicator 12.4.1, as well as we have some relevance for the indicator 12.4.2 and 12.5.1. For those indicators, for the 12.4.1, UNEP, UN Environment, is the custodian agency, and for the other 2, it's a UN Environment and United Nations Statistical Division. And then we have other indicators which are in the second row, for which we have partly some data which could be used in the future for reporting. So let's zoom into this 12.4 target and related indicator. So the target is, and this is what I mentioned in the very beginning of the webinar, it's a 2020 SAICM goal, which reads as to achieve, well, here slightly modified, but the main, let's say, concept is that to achieve environmentally sound management of chemicals and waste throughout the life cycle, in line with agreed international frameworks, and to reduce releases into various media in order to minimize the adverse impact on human health and the environment. And here we have a specific indicator for that in relation to this target. It's a number of parties to MEAs on chemicals and hazardous waste that meet the obligations and commitments in transmitting information. So we have been working together with our colleagues in UN Environment in Nairobi, as well as the Montreal Protocol and Minamata Convention, although it has not yet entered into force, to develop the methodology. And while the data for this indicator is already collected by the Secretariat because it's a part of our core functions, we decided to establish together, collectively, complex. It's a complex indicator with various parameters. So for the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, these parameters include information that each party, whatever its national circumstances, has the obligation to report or to transmit to the Secretariat. So it's basically a nomination of the official contact or focal points. It's under Stockholm Convention, it's national implementation plans and its revision every time there is a new chemical added to the Stockholm Convention. It's a national, also national reports every 4 years. Under Basel, it's a national yearly reports, and under Rotterdam, it's decisions concerning the imports of chemicals listed under Rotterdam. And also, since Montreal also part of this methodology, there is a specific requirements for transmission of information under the Montreal Protocol. So we have already some preliminary, let's say, graph to show the global transmission rate for the 4 instruments for 2010-2014, which which considers all these different parameters which I mentioned just before, and we can see that in terms of the, for example, Montreal Protocol has 100% transmission rate, Rotterdam 71%, Basel 57%, and Stockholm 51%. And here, well, I should note that we could say that although we gave the equal weight to different parameters under the Stockholm Convention, the parameters are more, let's say, very time-consuming, and also it requires a lot of very serious work, and there are perhaps more requirements there. That's why we could see that there is a slightly less global transmission rate than compared to other MEAs. So I know that the time is actually passing very quickly. I need to finish soon. I'm going a little bit over the time. Just very quickly, I would like to mention that there are also waste-related indicators, and I put them together. It's a 12.4.2, 12.5.1, and 11.6.1. So it's about generation of hazardous waste. It's about national recycling rate, and it's about indicator related to total urban solid waste generated by cities. So in a way, it's good to look at these indicators as a package because they are interrelated. And for the first one, for example, we have we do collect data through the national reports under the Basel Convention. Although from 2016, from last year, this requirement on reporting on hazardous waste, on data on hazardous waste generated became optional, but even before the submission rate was quite low. So we noted that countries do have a challenge in providing this information. The other 2 indicators are probably even slightly more difficult to get the data, and there is actually some discrepancy between the terminology which we have in the Basel Convention and then other players. For example, United Nations Statistical Division uses because they do also collect data, but I will not go into the details at this point. We also would like to mention that there are other indicators, for example, on agriculture, on health, for example, mortality rate attributed to air pollution and unsafe water use, which is for which we can, well, partly have the data, but conceptually, the more work needs to be done in order to get to this result. And also here I would like to mention the indicator related to water and partnership for the goals in terms of the equipment, environmentally sound management technologies. So again, we don't really collect this data, but obviously this is a big important aspect of the work of the conventions. So I would like to finish by point out to two things. First of all, to the challenges and opportunities of measuring progress and various levels. And there are some challenges are at the global level. As I mentioned, for example, there is inconsistent terminology when it comes to the global indicators with, for example, Basel Convention. There is also, I think we need to recognize that more quantitative evidence and data collection is needed at the national level. And we do know that there are challenges in data collection, which includes, well, there are various challenges, but for example, one is coordination between various ministries at the national level. There is also a linkage with the National Statistical Office needs to be perhaps strengthened in some countries. We know that let's say countries don't sometimes report data to us because there is no inventories or there is no registers on specific chemicals, waste or emissions and releases. So there is this type of work also needs to be undertaken. But also we need to think about challenges as perhaps opportunities and how we can streamline certain processes and also reduce the burden of reporting on countries. Because what is important, I think, to mention under the global indicators is that, yes, countries produce data which are then, in many cases, are being collected by within the existing mechanisms. For example, in our case, we have, it's a global conventions, but you also have some voluntary reporting questionnaires which are done by the UN Statistical Division and UN Environment. So there are various mechanisms through which countries are already reporting data. Here I would like to finish my presentation, but just before giving the floor to Derek, if I may, I would like to show one tool which I find very, very interesting. It's a tool which is available within UNEP Live. It's called Environment Live. And here there is another way to visualize how various SDGs and targets and indicators are related to various conventions. For example, here if we take goal 12 and we choose the Basel Convention, you could see the linkages between SDGs and between the Basel Convention. And here you can go much further. And for example, here we have this indicator about 12.5.1 about national recycling rate, and to which it shows to which let's say targets and specific obligation under the Basel Convention it relates to. So there are other interesting let's say ways you can explore this tool, but if you want to know more about the linkages between the BRS conventions and other conventions and SDGs, that could be a tool to have a look. All right, so I would like to just show our websites, and thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Tatiana. Just at this point, I'd like to invite Juan Bello from the Nations Environment Latin American Caribbean Regional Office to Panama to respond on behalf of the Iron Earth Alliance partners.
It is my great honor to, on behalf of the Eye on Earth Alliance, express our gratitude to our speaker of today, Mrs. Tatiana Terekova, and all the attendees to this webinar. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I just want to say that looking at the history of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, it is possible to recognize that to a great extent these conventions are the result of data from scientific research and environmental monitoring that became widely available, drawing global attention and providing the evidence for global action. This reflects quite well the principles of the Eye on Earth Alliance, in particular the vision of a world where environmental data and information are actively and effectively used to support the decisions to help our communities, societies, and countries move towards sustainability. Detoxifying the planet is probably one of the greatest and more pressing challenges of our time. Addressing this challenge necessarily requires data and information, either for national or international regulations, policy enforcement, or public engagement and understanding, among many others. So, as explained by Tatiana, adequate management of chemicals requires that the entire life cycle of these elements should be overseen through extraction, production, formulation, and use phases through final disposal. There are many chemicals currently used in various industries for which we know virtually nothing about their effects on living organisms and whole ecosystems. So there is consensus that one of the main problems in dealing with chemicals is the large data gap. Of the tens of thousands of chemicals on the market, few have been thoroughly evaluated to determine their effects on human health and the environment. So we have many questions from the audience, so I want to close my intervention by thanking again Tatiana on behalf of the Eye on Earth partners and community for her wonderful, very informative and engaging presentation, to the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi for organizing and facilitating this webinar, and to all of you for your interest and participation. Over to you, Derek.
Right, thank you so much, Juan. And now we will turn to questions and answers. I feel morally obliged to give an opportunity to Ahmed Madavi from Iran. Ahmed was is a long-term follower of Eye on Earth and was one of the people who suggested to me that this topic area be the subject of a webinar. So,
okay, thank you very much, Ms. Terekova. That was a comprehensive, really, presentation. I have many questions, as I sent already some of them, but I have tens of them that I try to, as Derek told me, to send the most important one at first. Last week I was in Helsinki for the Helsinki Chemicals Forum, and there was a lot of discussion about that ECHA, European Chemical Agency, is now taking over, EPA, and so ECHA REACH is going to lead the world for chemical management. And I wanted to know your idea. One more of my questions. It's a while, and especially again in Helsinki, there was a big conference about the World Circular Economy Forum. And we did lots of discussion about how we can employ circular economy for chemicals management. How much it is possible really? That's a big question that we are dealing with. It's in past few years that the matter of circular economy came along. Thank you very much, and I hope that we get another session or opportunity to put many of these questions, because as I think the problem of chemicals is getting worse and worse, and hopefully that BRS is doing something for that. Thank you.
There are a number of questions in the queue which are related to the variants of the same question, I would say. So Tatiana, if you would like to respond to Ahmed, please.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Ahmed, for these interesting questions. And perhaps I will start with the second one about the circular economy. And obviously, that had been a really important issue, how to really promote the circular economy. And we know that from the point of view of the resources and resource efficiencies, and for example, when we're talking about e-waste, this is a very strong concept where we say, okay, we need to do this urban mining, basically extract the precious metals and other materials from the e-waste, and enter them again into the economy, and obviously there is economic drivers for that. And but one issue I wanted to mention is that there are some exceptions, right, to whether we can really promote the, let's say, recycling of the let's say total recycling. Why I'm saying that? Because under the Stockholm Convention we have this specific chemicals, which is called this BDEs, the flame retardant chemicals, which are POPs. And in fact, when you recycle products which has this chemical, you can have some releases, adverse releases. So in general, the general principle of the Stockholm Convention is not to recycle products which contain these chemicals. However, now countries have a so-called exemption. They can still do it until 2030, but after 2030, parties to the Stockholm Convention will not be able to recycle products which contain this specific chemicals. So I think in general, the concept of circular economy obviously is a really important one in the world of the scarce resources, but there are a few let's say aspects to that, exceptions, which one need to consider, and also this is in order also to meet the obligation of the Basel on the Stockholm Convention. And in terms of your first question about European Chemical Agency, it's true that well, certain regions, and for example Europe and European Union, of course, perhaps they're more advanced in terms of the risk assessment of chemicals entering the market, and but as a global treaty, we have to say that we have, it's a platform where all countries in the world meet together, and different countries have different capacities, and they have to have agreement where there are certain obligations, certain decisions where everyone will be able, all the parties will be able to meet these obligations. So I think what the European Union is doing is great, but I will not be able to really comment on their plans with their institutional settings in this regard, because we really work on the global level, which really include all countries in the world. Thank you.
There was a question from Bisuit, but I think that concerns e-waste, and I think that's been kind of covered. I mean, he's just gone offline, it seems. And one more question. Then the first question that came in was from Marie-Therese Saif in Lebanon. Marie, if you wanted to question.
Good morning. I'm Marie-Therese Saif from Lebanon. Currently, now I'm in America. But we have a big issue in Lebanon. We have a big crisis waste management from 2015. And we try to collaborate with the government. And until now, we don't have any access to resolve this problem. There is any way to help us, like an international community, to make an implementation to the government to resolve this issue, because we are contaminate the Mediterranean, really. And a big problem, not only for Lebanon, but for all the region around, and all the cities, and all people around us. Can you help us to resolve this problem?
Okay. Well, Well, thank you, Marie, for this important question. In fact, yes, I'm also aware of the waste management crisis in Lebanon, and as far as I know, this is let's say it's a crisis related to the household waste and let's say food waste. Well, let's say the main focus of the Basel Convention is the hazardous waste. But having said that, we also have this angle on about the household waste. We do have the technical assistance in the Secretariat, and I think we need to maybe have a more closer dialogue, discussion about what kind of assistance you would require, because there are certain things we could perhaps help with, and also we could direct you to other partners as well, because I suspect that will require significant resources and bigger projects. I think we have to look exactly what is needed there, but it would be good to have perhaps a follow-up email exchange about this, that we could see how we could either facilitate your contacts or what exactly what we can do. So,
excuse me, Tatiana. UN Environment, UNEP, came to Lebanon many times to arrange and make a strategy for the waste management with the government. But until now, nobody answer, or nobody give answer for any problem, how to resolve this problem. I mean the government.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, so thank you for this information, additional information. Well, I think, because in the Basel Convention we also have the focal points and competent authorities in the government, and it would be good to know whether the competent authority, which is normally the Ministry of Environment, has been engaged in that, and we have to see exactly where you stand with that, because as a Secretariat we have not been involved in that, but we would like to perhaps also get engaged with our UNEP colleagues. I understand this is a high concern, because there are obviously implications in terms of air, water quality from this issue, and soil, and yes. So let's see what exactly is happening in terms of the cooperation between the government and UN Environment, and what we as a Secretariat can do.
Okay, thank you for the answer. There are, Marie, there are a number of questions along the lines of what you've said here. There are quite a few people from the region that I'm also here in the Middle East, North Africa region. There are quite a few people who are expressing concerns about the issue in this region. There was a question that came in from a couple of people who've asked questions along a similar theme. So, and Mariana Ortego from Mexico, I wanted to put your question.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Tatiana, thank you for your presentation. It was really enlightening. My question is about the relationship, if you could tell us a bit more about the relationship between these conventions and Sustainable Development Goal 14.
14 is life below water.
Yeah, sorry.
Tatiana, there was another question, or a number of questions here, but there was one, I'm just trying to find it very quickly, from Varuzan, who's asking, is the water pollution proportion percentage in global pollution in the water space? So a number of issues about chemicals in the water environment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so let's say the goal 14, and then there is a target 14.1, and then there is indicator. There is, let's say, perhaps a bit weaker link, but obviously there is a link. And from our perspective, we are talking about specifically water emissions of specific POPs, and we do collect data on that through the Stockholm Convention. in terms of the SDGs, we have not been really having a dialogue with other UN agencies because, you know, for each indicator there is a custodian agency, and this agency coordinates the data collection and reporting, later reporting. So we flagged the goal 14 on oceans as a potential, let's say, indicator and target where we could potentially provide data from the point of view of the pollution, right? But also there is indicator 14.1.1, and it's about index of coastal eutrophication and floating plastic debris density. And in fact, until now, we have not been really looking into that. But this year, at our conference of the parties asked us to launch, to look in the do a report to look at the information about POPs in plastics, which are in the plastic debris. So this is a new area of work which now we're starting to explore. And so these are these two dimensions, basically. The dimension where we have a data reported on specific POPs into water, but there we don't so much distinguish between, let's say, oceans and other water bodies. So this is the one part, and then the second part is the plastic debris in the oceans, and this is something which is a new area which we are going to explore. So unfortunately, I cannot really go much beyond this answer because we cannot really talk about all the chemicals in water and oceans, because our conventions are very targeted, so very precise in a way. That's why we just really have to focus on the chemicals which are, in the case of Stockholm, which are really part of the convention. So yeah, so at that moment this is my answer. So there are two aspects to that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tatiana. I'm seeing calls coming in or questions coming in from Guinea, Burkina Faso, all over the world. It's been a really exciting webinar. So thank you for taking part and making today's webinar a success.